everybody. Welcome back to another episode of Culture Dads. Two based publishing dads get together to do deep dives into retro pop culture for folkish and dissident minds. But what's up, Mike? How we doing?
I'm good, man. Yeah, no, this is good. This is a real blast from the past for me because I haven't checked this out for we did Ninja Scroll last time, and I think I watched that about 15 years ago or something like that. I haven't watched this since like 1995 or something. That's the last time. So yeah. Anyway, I'll let you introduce it.
So today we're going to talk about the golden era. They call it the Golden Age, the original Ultimate Fighting Championship, UFC, which was created in and around the early 90s by a guy named Art Davies. There's a couple other guys in the mix, and they created what was called the Ultimate Fighting Champion. It was actually originally called it was going to be called WOW, War of the Worlds, and they turned that name down and they called it something else, and then they finally settled on the name Ultimate Fighting Championship, UFC. And what this was a lot of people take it for granted now, guys, maybe a little younger guys that are just UFC has always been there for them, and they're very familiar with how UFC looks today. The original UFC, not only was it revolutionary, nobody really saw this stuff on TV. This was actually considered uncouth to be on TV back in the day, and we're going to talk about that a little bit. But this was like a revolution in the West, anyways. Nobody saw this type of fighting before. This was really, really new stuff. However, the first probably 2 or 3 UFCs were really raw. And what happened was like I mentioned, Art Davies, a few guys got together to create the UFC, and they brought on Rorion Gracie, who is the father of the Gracie family. And actually, the way that they found him was they saw an article in Playboy. It was just called like Bad Family or something like that. The Bad Family. And it was the Gracies, Rorion Gracie, who is, people have their opinions about how the Gracies have found their way to fame and all that. But they were really, really clever marketing people. And what they pretty much did was in the article, it was outlining who the Gracies are, what they have made, which is Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, which is, kind of their flavor of Jiu-Jitsu. And their whole big thing was they were offering, I mean, obviously they didn't have this kind of money, but they said they would put up $100,000 if you come with $100,000 and put up these wagers, and they would match it if you would come, anybody in the world, to come fight them. And obviously nobody is going to just like go all the way down to Brazil and with $100,000 in their pocket to go like challenge these randos in the jungle, right? But it was a brilliant marketing strategy, and it got them onto this article of Playboy. So at this time also, the Gracies were kind of doing like these different like tapes where they would go around and do these clinics and stuff, showing off their new martial arts style. Well, Rorion Gracie got brought on as part owner of the UFC, and they came together and they came up with this idea to do this Ultimate Fighting Championship. Take 8 guys. I think they originally wanted 32 guys, but they could only get, I think they only originally had 12, and it went down to 8. I can't remember exactly how many there were, but there were 3 rounds of fighters. You would fight. It was like, what's that called? You had like a bracket. You would fight, you win, you fight again, you win. And you would literally have to fight 3 or 4 people in one night. How these fights were. And they were no holds barred. The only rules were no biting, no eye gouging. So you could go bare knuckle, you could kick people in the face, you could hit people in the groin, you could grab hair, you could like really you could headbutt, like you could do anything, right? You could throw knees to the back of the neck, like back of the head, spine, elbows, like whatever, and they did all of this. It was brutal, right? It was really brutal. So UFC went on. The first 3 UFCs were won by Royce Gracie. He won. which was, kind of the point of why Horion, his dad, wanted to do it, right? And then, actually, and here's another fun fact about the UFC. The octagon was suggested and designed by John Milius, the director of Conan the Barbarian and many other movies. He was actually in on the design and the aesthetic of the UFC from the beginning. But the UFC took the world by storm. And you got so many great fighters out of it, which we're going to get into later. But that effectively is the origin story of UFC.
Yeah, man, that's actually a lot of background that I didn't know about it, how it came to be, and how it originated. But I'll set the stage in a sort of like broader cultural sense, I guess. At the time, when the UFC launched, I would have been about like 13 or 14 years old, and I saw the first one. I rented it from like Blockbuster Video or something back when that kind of shit like actually still existed. And you've got to think, you got to put yourself, in that time in the like early to mid 90s, where what most people are seeing on TV in terms of fighting or whatever is like, of course, there's boxing, which is, had been a sport for a super long time, since before TV, obviously. But in addition to that, so like that's one style of like, that's a kind of martial art, shall we say. It's like, boxing is like what most people think of when they kind of think of like a street fight or whatever. But in addition to that, you'd also like the culture had kind of, the 80s was basically like this time where, world music was a huge thing. Like Paul Simon is playing like fucking African music, and like it's sort of the beginnings of like true multiculturalism. So at this stage, you get stuff like The Karate Kid and Bruce Lee movies, which are obviously much earlier, had made a kind of an impact where like Asian culture started to become a thing, like kind of like semi-mainstreamed through the 1980s. And this is kind of what people thought of when they thought of martial arts, especially Eastern martial arts. They thought of this kind of like crane, kata style, like kung fu or whatever. This very kind of like airy and like not so much down to earth kind of, the kind of stuff that you would watch on movies. And then you get like sort of like a little bit more like gritty stuff like Jean-Claude Van Damme. And of course, Muay Thai kickboxing, which was like, not really popularized on TV or in movies that much, but at the same time, it was, a martial art that was gaining popularity. And then, of course, you've got sort of like other iconic martial arts like sumo wrestling. You've got like different sort of like more obscure martial arts like ninjutsu or I forget what the name of the Russian one is, but there's like a Russian one. There's
Sambo.
Like Sambo, yeah, and there's I think it's another Saw one. It's French kickboxing basically. So you've got that's it, yeah. So you've got all of these different kinds of martial arts, and the question is, which one of them actually is the best? Like, do any of them really actually work? Like in a real life situation, if you were to throw down with some guy at a bar fight or something like that, would ninjutsu actually work? Would it be something that you could really use? And nobody really knew, really. There was like basically no way of sort of working this out, or like it hadn't been sort of mainstreamed or broadcast in any sort of large scale format, anything like this. So when the UFC came around, this was interesting. This was something really very new. This was like you would get all of these different kinds of martial arts and pit them one against the other, essentially in a real fair fight. I mean, without like no holds barred, right? Like guys would basically be able to do whatever they need to do in order to win. It's a real sort of like bar fight almost kind of situation.
Exactly. There was no stop it. The only way you stopped it was by knockout, tap out, or the side your side throws
thrown in the towel.
There were no rounds and there were no weight classes.
Yeah, that's the other thing. No weight class. Like that's crazy. Like to think now there's no weight classes. There was no fucking drug interesting. So like you get all these juice monkeys, you get like this, 400-pound sumo wrestler guy versus a 160-pound 6'3" kickboxer, and you get to see which of these actually fucking works. And this is what made it super interesting. This is what made it revolutionary and new and cool. And especially for a kid like me who is into martial arts, I took judo and jiu-jitsu, did it for many, many years, actually, especially judo. And it was really interesting to watch this. Really cool to see like what actually does work. Something like jiu-jitsu, not very well known at this time, not compared to karate, not compared to boxing, not compared to kickboxing. All of this stuff, it was really just sort of up in the air. You didn't really know what was good, what worked, what didn't. And this was basically the way of kind of settling all that. So this is what actually, for me, makes old school UFC so much more interesting than what you see today. There's a question about whether, Dan Severn in his prime would be able to like KO or like to beat, Conor McGregor or whatever. But putting that all aside, I just think old school UFC is way, way more interesting to watch. It's more entertaining. There's more variety to it. And this is kind of why when it started, even in the like late 90s, to change a little bit, sort of move towards a more like bouncer versus bouncer style of like mixed martial art, where basically the mixing of the martial arts, the mixture started to homogenize really. That was a lot less interesting to me. So I think that's the main thing that you got to understand about the early UFC is the fact that it really was just a sort of anything can happen kind of situation. That's what made it so dynamic, and that's what made it so entertaining to watch.
Yeah, I love all that. And you mentioned about the 6'3" kickboxer versus the sumo guy. That was actually the very first fight in UFC 1. Yeah. If you go back and you watch UFC 1, I can't remember the guys' names, but
it's a fucking brutal fight too.
It's a brutal fight. It's this big giant sumo guy, 300 something pounds, against this tall skinny guy. They start exchanging blows. The sumo guy's pushing him back. He knocks down the sumo guy and he just launches his kick right into the sumo guy's face and knocks half his teeth out. It was brutal. That's another thing about the level of brutality on these early fights was much higher than the fights we see now. And we have to remember that in these early UFC fights, these guys, we're going to get into the question of can these guys compete here or there, or can they mix, or what? Who would do good in what era, and we can talk about that. But these guys came from a different school of thought. Yeah, a lot of these fighters that appear in the first 5, 6, 7, 8 UFCs are not professional fighters. They are amateur fighters, but a lot of these guys come from I believe they just called it HB, which was no holds barred fighting circuits, which were effectively illegal warehouse, like black market. Like you ever see
Fight
the
club,
movies?
basically.
Yeah. You see in the movies, there's like a cage. It's in an abandoned warehouse. You got two gnarly dudes blowing each other's teeth out. There's guys screaming with money, taking bets. That's where these guys come from. A lot of these guys are killers. You know what I mean? They don't have training camps. They don't have all this stuff. They're guys that usually have a background in wrestling in college or high school, and then maybe like a little amateur something here or there, and they just spent their lives punching people in the face. So these guys are just bloodthirsty dudes. And you see it. Even some of the amateur guys, like some of the amateur fights between these guys that may not have the best form and everything like that. These are guys that have like, like 100-0 bare knuckle boxing records and stuff like that. In fact, Ken Shamrock fought a guy, I believe it was in UFC 2. It was either UFC 1 or UFC 2. He fought like a guy that was like the reigning boss hog of the bare knuckle circuit, and he choked him out or something. It was a really cool fight. So these were not Like you look on the screen, you're like, oh, these guys are amateurs. These are the kind of guys that if you squared up with them in the bar, they would blow your teeth out of your skull and put you in the hospital. These were tough guys.
Yeah, and it was so up in the air at this point. Like nobody really knew what to make of it because professional wrestling, like WWF, was a thing and had been for like a decade or two at this point. And yeah, like you were talking about that fight that they had between the sumo wrestler and the kickboxer guy, the very first fight, where they actually had like representatives from like Gold's Gym and like a few of these like other different like organizations that were sort of like peripheral to the fighting circuit or whatever, that were like basically there to kind of scout and see whether or not it was worth endorsing and everything. And after this first fight, it's like the guy's 2 teeth like fly out of the ring and like land in somebody's drink or whatever. And it's like they just get up and walk out and they're like, nah, we don't want anything to, this is not going to go out over well with our board of directors, like this kind of thing.
Exactly.
So it was so new and it was so like revolutionary or whatever. And yeah, I mean, I just can't underscore enough the fact that they like what was so good about it is just seeing these different martial arts go head to head. Like I still remember watching the fight between, because I was always fascinated with ninjutsu. I thought that was like the coolest martial art, basically. I really wanted to like learn this this particular martial art. And they had one guy, I think his name was Scott Morris or whatever. And it's like this guy with like this white guy with a curly mullet, total like ninja looking character. And he's, he goes up against like some guy and he basically, I think he pretty much like puts him, into like a rear naked choke within like 12 seconds or something ridiculous like that. It was like so quick. And it's just like, holy fuck, that's cool. And then the next one that he goes up against this like mulatto, like boxer guy basically. And it's one of the most brutal fights of all UFC. Like it's still famous because the boxer guy he gets hammed so bad that like, because you got to think like at this time, like Dave mentioned, the ref was not allowed to stop the match. So it's like if your corner didn't throw in the towel, and if you didn't tap out, and if you didn't get obviously KO'd in like one shot, the fight just goes on and on, right? And this guy gets into a position where he's like in a mount, and he's just raining haymakers down on the guy's face, and he just starts elbowing him in like the eye socket or whatever. And it's like you could tell that if the guy like had handed him 2 more blows, he would have been dead,
Yeah.
So this was the match where they were like, okay, Big John, whatever his name was,
McCarthy.
Big John McCarthy gets he gets to break up the fight whenever he sees fit, right? Because we don't want guys to actually die. So this is kind of like, this is what you're seeing on TV here is a guy getting beaten with literally within an inch of his life. And it was just so cool to see these like, different martial arts go up against each other. Like when I was a kid, my parents actually took me to live overseas because my dad had to like work in this foreign country. And so I got a taste for travel at a very early age. And I remember when I was, quite young, I got this almanac. I think it was like the 1988 almanac or something like that. I probably still have it somewhere. And I don't know why. I was just obsessed with this thing. I used to read it. I would like read through, like if you've ever read an almanac, this is not like light beach reading. This is like, it's just like lists of figures and statistics and stuff like that about different countries. And I would just like look at the different names of the countries, look at the different flags, and then like glean whatever I possibly could from these like reams of statistics about the country, what it would be like to live in like Vanuatu or like Equatorial Guinea or, Hokkaido, Japan or something like that. And just like get a feel for the different like parts of the world, the different ethnicities, the different cultures. And I was just obsessed with that. I love the fact of different cultures I love, if I'm being honest with you, I really like the diversity of it. I thought that this was something amazing, and clearly this played into my like later love of nationalism. And I remember playing Street Fighter 2 as well. And one of the things in Street Fighter 2 is when you select your character, you get to see the guy or girl that you're choosing and everything, but he's also got a nationality, right? Like, I think I forget the names now, but like, Chun-Li was from China, Guile was from America, the weird beast guy was from Brazil. All these
Blanca,
different, that Blanca, that's right.
Zangief from Russia.
Yeah, no, that's right. And on their home turf, it's like you get to see the background, you get to see the different people kind of like dancing around in the background, or like something weird, but that's particular to that place, and you just get the feeling of what it is to kind of like be in that place or from that place. Like, what was his name? Sagat from Thailand, the big like 7 foot tall guy or whatever, with this gigantic Buddha statue resting in the background. And you just get the feeling of like the flavor of the different places. And I love that. And it's this difference. It's this sort of the absence of homogeneity across, globally, that is just so good. And it was really cool to see that in the early UFC. And I really feel that something was kind of lost later on when it did become kind of homogenized. And every fighter was basically like every other fighter, with like a slightly different skin tone and different name and different flag, and that's it. But they all could have been interchangeable. There was something really cool in the beginning that where that wasn't the case.
And speaking on that, on the you mentioned about kind of this is where multiculturalism during like the 80s. This is where you start getting the Jackie Chan movies. This is where like kind of the influx of Asian culture starts coming in through cinema, the kung fu movies. You got it's pretty much established that the baddest dude on the planet was Bruce Lee, and the other baddest dude was Muhammad Ali, and boxing was a black man's sport, and martial arts was for Asians, and like it was where we're white guys was something that you saw in medieval movies or fantasy movies or whatever, right? But in the UFC, when you start getting into 3 and 4 and 5 and going all the way to 10, you start to see the influx of the ground and pound, the wrestler, and it absolutely got dominated by big, husky, tough white dudes. This is where it reinvigorated the absolute power and universality, the usefulness of Western wrestling, which is they called it freestyle wrestling, which is also called catch wrestling, or catch as catch can, which is kind of a derivative of European folk wrestling, things like ringen, sambo, glima, wrestling, then also like pancration, Greco-Roman style wrestling. These are wrestling is like the European style, right?
Yeah.
You got a big husky white dude that's got a strong back. He scoops you off the ground. He drops you on your fucking head, and then he stays on top of you. And these guys that came in, we're talking Dan Severn, we're talking Don Fry, Mark Coleman, Tank Abbott, right? These dudes that came in and dominated and became champions for quite a long time. Ken Shamrock. These guys brought Ken Shamrock. Obviously, he was considered a shoot fighter. He was more of a submission fighter. But Dan the Beast Severn is like that's the man.
Professional. He was a professional wrestler in his day, and like I watched this interview with him where he said that before he came to the UFC, it was like, they at the time they were having like hundreds of guys applying a day, because he wasn't in number 1. He was in like 2 or 3, and then from then on. And they had by this time it was already a massive phenomenon. They had like hundreds of guys applying every single day, and his application kind of got lost in the shuffle, and it got kind of overlooked or whatever. And partly because I guess on the application form they would have like a sort of pre-filled options or preset options for like, are you a karate guy? What's your style? Are you a kickboxer? Are you jiu-jitsu? Whatever. And he was a professional wrestler, like we're talking about like WWF style, right?
Yeah.
And it not considered a martial art. In fact, the UFC was very, very careful to distinguish themselves and distance themselves from professional wrestling in the first instance, because they didn't want to be seen as that. They didn't want all the theatrics and all the, they didn't want it to be seen as fake, basically. So Dan Severn doesn't actually have like this martial art, so he had to like tick other and then be like, yeah, I'm a professional wrestler, whatever. And it wasn't really taken seriously at that point. But of course, as I forget what it was. I think he was champion in UFC 3. Later on, coming in and just absolutely dominating. And like here's a guy that was clearly like, I think in maybe it was UFC 6, I can't remember. But I remember when at one point when he was champion, he was 37 years old.
Yeah.
This is this is not exactly the prime of your physical condition, right? And you look at him, even in his prime, like in the UFC, I mean, he's well built. He's a big guy. He's thick torso, but also not cut like the way that a Ken Shamrock was. Like Ken Shamrock was clearly, he was juicing. He must have been, right? Mm-hmm. Dan Severn was clearly not, and yet his style was absolutely dominant. Like he was I would say probably in retrospect, maybe not at the time, but looking back on it, he was probably my favorite of the actual, like, the UFC champions, because he does, like, his style really is, it exemplifies a lot of the kind of martial arts that I was doing. Because when I was in high school, I was on the wrestling team. I did Greco-Roman wrestling. I did judo. I did jiu-jitsu. This was a huge part of my life. Martial arts was huge for me at this point. Me and my buddies used to do this like kind of fight club type thing, really. Like without the striking, we would do wrestling mostly. Because I had a friend who was into Kenpo, karate, and I was the jiu-jitsu guy, and like other guys into different things, and slightly different. But yeah, I mean, Dan Severn was like, his style was just very reminiscent of, like you say, it's sort of like the primordial European folk martial art that you would get with like pankration and Greco-Roman wrestling and that kind of thing. And the guy absolutely dominated, right? Like I think I looked at his stats at the time. Something like 6'2", 260 pounds. This is not a guy that's like, I'm obviously in good shape, but not a guy that's like cut the way that like an Arnold is, or a Ken Shamrock or something like that. This guy was not trying to squeeze into any like weight class, because of course they didn't have them back then.
Yeah.
But he was dominant, right? Like, and I just think it's really interesting to have basically no rules, no weight classes, nothing. And this is what the guy that comes out on top. And he's not the only one. He wasn't like this sort of like one hit wonder or whatever. There was, like you said, you get guys like Tank Abbott, or what was his name? Oleg Tatarov or something like that.
Yep. Sambo guy.
Yeah. Guys like that, in good shape, definitely good physical condition, but not like, top physical condition, cut like 2% fat or whatever it is. You know what I mean? It's like these are guys that just know how to fight and are big and burly, right? That's their qualification. That's their training, kind of thing. So yeah, no, it's just cool to sort of see that style.
Yeah, these guys, they're like Mike said, they're not like Calvin Klein underpants models, right? These are big husky guys that have spent their life training endurance. Dan Severn grew up on a farm. He went on. Let me lay this out for you guys. Dan Severn is somebody that does not get the respect that he deserves when it comes to professional fighting. I would argue Dan Severn belongs on the Mount Rushmore of greatest athletes of all time. He was, like Mike says, when he was fighting, he was like pushing 40, and then later in his 40s, beating guys like in their prime, guys in their 20s in their prime. beating him, dominating him in his 40s. 6'2", 260 pounds, incredible agility. The guy was just he was a master on the mat. Let me read some of his stats for you. This guy is 101 wins and 26 losses. He is one of 2 fighters in the world with a record of over 100 wins. And the other guy, what's his name? Travis Fullman, Travis something. Dan Severn has beaten him twice. He's one of 2 guys, and Dan Severn beat the other guy twice. He's a 5th-degree black belt in judo, 2nd-degree black belt in jiu-jitsu. He's first, I don't know how to say the word, Razarad or something like that. He's considered like the 1st-degree international master in Sambo. He was a 2-time NCAA division, 1st division All-American, right? He was twice a champion. But this is before this is in college, right? He was in the Olympics, on the Olympic team twice. This guy went on to do professional wrestling and was a champion for like 4 years. He went and wrestled in Japan where guys were getting thrown on thumbtacks and like all this kind of like crazy stuff, like really, really crazy stuff. He comes to the UFC and dominates and then continues fighting into his 40s and 50s. This guy is an absolute animal. And you could stack this guy, Dan the Beast Severn. You could put him in any era of fighting, professional fighting, anywhere in the world, and he would dominate with his style, with his physique, and with his technique. The guy was incredible. He competed in King of the Cage, Pride, Cage, the Cage Rage tournament or whatever, WEC, like MFC. He was in the the IFW, whatever, in Japan. He was in I believe he was in WWF or he was in NWA, the National Wrestling Association. This guy is like his pedigree is unbelievable. You know, and he doesn't get mentioned among the Muhammad Alis. He doesn't get mentioned among, who else is up there for professional fighters? I don't know. Smoking Joe
Wayne Gretzky and
he belongs in the conversation. In my opinion, in Dave's book, if you are having a conversation about the greatest professional athletes of all time and Dan Severn isn't in that conversation, well, then fuck your conversation.
Yeah, for sure, man. No, that guy is super impressive. There was lots of impressive guys back in the day, and going into like the late 90s when it did start to change and kind of become more recognizably what it is today. I couldn't give you a list of names, but like, you've got your like Chuck Liddells and lots of guys. I mean, and lots of these guys were just not nice dudes either. I mean, I won't like throw shade on any of them because I don't know enough, but I know enough that like there was some weird shit going on with the Gracie family and certain members of that. And but that's the thing, is like, that's part of why it's real, especially at this point, is it's not just like guys kind of like shit talking each other. In fact, you go back and you watch the like first like 2 or 3 seasons or whatever of series of UFCs, and the shit talking is really actually it's really hokey and like very primitive compared to what came later or whatever, where it did kind of like get to be more of like a man, like clearly guys are like, they work on their shit talking, right? None of that back in the day. Like, it was, very, very sort of like, Windows 95 style edits, like fucking, very, very hokey kind of, interplay between banter and everything like that. But man, the fighting just off the charts. It just completely ridiculous, and like, especially for the time. So. Yeah, and then it kind of started to change a little bit later, as it blew up immediately, pretty much, and it continued to go. And getting into the mid 2000s, you actually got to where, like, because apparently, like, it went through like a few different sort of eras of ownership and whatnot.
Yeah.
And whatever the name of the owner was in the like mid 2000s, kind of got the worst of it, because at that stage, although it was gigantic and huge, there was actually attempts to kind of try to shut it down. And like coming from very high places, like John McCain, coming in and basically legislating to require it to have like certain standards brought in, and if they didn't, that they wouldn't have been able to like televise it and all this stuff. Apparently UFC 12 actually had to be moved overnight from I believe it was being held in Buffalo, and they had to sort of reschedule for the next day. Then they moved it to Alabama because they weren't prepared to like bring in all these standards of like, guys had to wear shin guards and helmets and gloves and stuff. Like that just wasn't what it was about, right? And the thing actually got banned. At one stage, it was banned in 36 states. And like I say, there was severe restrictions on televising it. So it started to look kind of like it was getting quite beleaguered at this point. Of course, like these standards eventually kind of get relaxed over time, because all standards seem to be getting relaxed over time. But in this case, that was something kind of good, because it was able to soldier on and become the UFC that we know today.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, it was definitely not a sort of straight shot to the Joe Rogan era or anything like that.
Yeah, John McCain personally, and a bunch of other in the United States government, they went on TV. And there was actually, you can go watch. There were not commercials, but there were like on your like nightly news or whatever. They were like hit pieces against this. This Bloodsport could be coming to your town and being taught to your children.
Human cockfighting.
Yeah. And there was actually, they actually did one of the UFC tournaments, or maybe it was one of because there was a few after UFC 4, 5, 6, there's a couple other companies that started cropping up doing the same thing. They had a tournament in Canada, and the Canadian government arrested them for like illegal blood sports.
Fucking
like this
shameful.
Yeah, it was really crazy. John McCain is like just the biggest there's ever been. This guy, he like went on TV. He did this entire like witch hunt campaign against mixed martial arts. Like he was so against it, gave him fines. It was bad, right? This was like they went on. We were talking about during the one heavy metal episode, we were talking about the church ladies, dude. Let me tell you guys, like the nanny state. The policing, the virtue signaling, all the shit we see with the pause people today, all the you know who's, that was going on back then. It was like still going on. They were still doing this kind of shit, except they were focused on different. They focused on all the stuff that we liked. You know what I mean? I guess they still do it, right? They're still going after all the stuff we like, but it was crazy. It was crazy. It was not like we see it today. It was so. I mean, we mentioned about the pay-per-view thing when UFC 1 came out. They went to HBO. They went, MGM Entertainment did pay-per-views. For folks that don't remember, pay-per-view was something, in order for you to see like one of these big live sport events, you had to go like rent a box and hook it up to your TV in your house, and that's how you watched it. And then later on, if you wanted to watch it later on, you either had to call the hotline and order a VHS, or you had to go to your local video store and rent it. So this is how I got introduced to it. My dad loved it. My dad thought it was like the greatest thing. And we would go to the video store and rent it when it came out, the UFC, whatever fight it was, whatever tournament it was. And all my dad's buddies would come over and they would drink beer and like smoke cigars and hoot and holler, and we would watch these like ridiculous fights. And it was like a really cool male bonding thing for me, right? All the boys getting together to watch UFC. And I think that there's a lot of people that could empathize with that this was kind of a piece of male bonding for them. And it really encouraged me to get into some I'm not like Mike. I didn't do martial arts my whole life. I took a little bit here, a little bit there. But I definitely was encouraged to go out into the backyard, and me and my buddies would have like little fight clubs and wrestling tournaments, and like it was just a lot of fun. It was great stuff.
Oh, definitely. And I think that kind of the warrior spirit, if you want to, romanticize it, but just sort of male aggression and like wanting to fight and wanting to get the best of your opponent. It really, I think, feeds into a lot of kind of what we are about, in the nationalist right. Really, it sounds like it's kind of miles away from it. But the fact is, I used to spend a lot of time debating guys online. I am that meme where it's like, come on, honey, come to bed. And it's like, no, somebody is wrong on the internet. I cannot let this go. Like that's me, right? That was me on Reddit, like, before I started Imperium Press. And the fact is, I love debating. I always have. And I love debating for the same reason that I liked fighting. Mm-hmm. The fact is, we as nationalists are beleaguered because, unlike just about anyone else, we actually disagree with the establishment. We actually dissent from popular opinion, and especially from the opinion of polite society, shall we say. Most of us are contrarians of some sort, because our thing, whatever that thing is, just attracts that kind of person. A lot of contrarians end up where we are, and you can really see that, especially on Telegram, where Telegram as a platform is really, because of its long format and it's much less structured than, say, Twitter is. It's very much given to making guys fight with each other, to be honest. And that's why you see, a lot of the like gay drama on Telegram that you don't see on Twitter. On Twitter, it's like guys in the nationalist right are more likely to kind of brigade other, factions like the progressives or like conservatives and stuff like that. You see a lot more solidarity on Twitter than you do on Telegram. And this is actually a point that Joel Davis made, and I think it's quite right. It's the structure of the platform that actually makes it so. But at the same time, it's also because Telegram is just so much less censorious than Twitter is. It basically allows our little ecosystem to thrive. And because our ecosystem consists of the personality type that it does, it's basically chock full of contrarians that are all getting into like little hair splitting debates over minor aspects of doctrine and all this and whatnot. But also it's because the nationalist right is filled with guys that are high T. And we like fighting. When we were in high school, we were that guy that would go out and participate in a fight club or join a martial arts studio or something like that, or like go to the bar and get in a fight or something. And the fact is that these kind of debates really are our sublimated UFC in a sense, right? It's like intellectual UFC. This is us getting the better of our opponent and, getting him to submit and tap out. You know what I mean? So, this is why I think UFC is pretty much unquestionably, it's unquestioned as something that's good and healthy and everybody kind of likes in our thing. I can't think of anybody, even guys who are like anti-sportsball, which I disagree with. I think sports are good. Mm-hmm. I think there's almost nobody that would counter signal UFC in our thing. And I think that's why. I think it actually, it's because, guys who end up where we are have this warrior spirit, and obviously the UFC channels that in a very visceral and immediate way. But at the same time, intellectual debate does as well for us. So I could see a big overlap between those two.
Yeah, Yeah, and I'm with you. I grew up. I loved football growing up. You know what I mean? It's the American pastime.
Yeah.
Thanksgiving after Thanksgiving dinner, you watch the Detroit Lions get smeared by the Packers. You know, it's just like I remember growing up every Thanksgiving watching Brett Favre. You know what I mean? The Super Bowl, watching guys in the Super Bowl. It's just like I was a big Philadelphia Eagles fan growing up. You know, all day. I inherited it from my grandmother, believe it or not, who was a crazy, crazy Eagles fan. You know what I mean? So it's like there once upon a time, sports ball was based, and the guys, the athletes that were in sports ball were actually like, you know, good stand up All American got for the most part, right? There was some scumbags in there, but you know, when you had Brett Favre or John Elway's or Joe Montana's rookie card, those guys were like good guys. They were guys that every time they got on TV, they told the kids, do good in school, make sure you go to the gym, stay healthy, eat your vegetables, and all that happy shit, right? So these guys that kids looked up to in sports ball back in the day were based, you know what I mean? And it was like they encouraged you to go play football in school or go play baseball in school or go, you know what I mean? It was like it was an extension of our culture, and it was cool back then, before the pause and before the hyper consumerism and the fantasy football and the kind of the toxic culture around sports ball today wasn't there 20, 30, 40, 50 years ago. It just wasn't. You know what I mean?
Oh yeah, definitely. I get what people are saying when they say that sports is kind of like a sublimated tribalism. It's like a surrogate tribalism where, you know, instead of defending your actual folk, you're out there defending your favorite team or whatever. Like, you know, it's a very commonly repeated trope.
It represented your region.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's a big part of it too, right? Like for me, as a huge hockey fan, naturally, as a Canadian, massive hockey fan, it just felt weird to cheer for, like, because I grew up like fairly close to Toronto. That was at least the closest, you know, major team, Toronto Maple Leafs, which kind of sucks for me because like they're a proverbially shitty team, but they're my fucking team, right? Like it doesn't matter, and it's just weird to cheer for the Vancouver Canucks or the Detroit Red Wings or any of these, you know, Montreal Canadiens, which is weird because that was my dad's team. But it was there was just never a question in my mind, but that I needed to I was on Toronto side, right? Nobody needed to tell me to cheer for them, right? And so there is something. Yes, it's a kind of surrogate identity, but at the same time, it's kind of it does cultivate that in you in a sense as well. At the same time, it's a bit of a pressure release valve for it. It also kind of cultivates it, and that's why leftists fucking hate sports, apart from all the hierarchy that's involved in it. But there's an even deeper reason to think that sports is something good, especially for children. When you're a kid, and especially when I was growing up, and it's a meme to say, back in my day we didn't have no participation trophies, but we didn't, and that made a lot of difference, right? Because what it meant was that if you lose, you're the fucking loser, right?
Yeah.
And you got to learn to deal with that, right? You learn to win gracefully without rubbing the other guy's nose in it. You learn to lose gracefully without your whole self-esteem collapsing or whatever. You learn the virtue of hard work. You learn that incremental improvement pays off over a course of years. You learn to cultivate skill over time. All these, you learn how to lead. You learn how to follow. You learn how to be part of a team, especially, if you play a team sport. All these things are important things for kids to learn. All these things are really indispensable to becoming a real well-rounded human being. And my God, I feel for children who grow up without any of that. Yeah. They develop these unbalanced personality profiles and just become, it's very hard to become a healthy human being without sports. I'm sorry to say. The problem comes when you turn into an adult and you stop playing them and you start becoming a pure spectator. Like as a kid growing up and playing hockey, I loved it. It was my life basically. Like hockey was basically my identity from roughly, you could say, age 10 through 16 or something like that. I loved watching any game of any team, knew all the players at the time. But then, at some stage, well, really was when I started smoking cigarettes. That was the end of that. And I stopped playing sports pretty much altogether. And I put childish things away. I hate to say that because what I'm saying here is that it's so important for a person as a formative influence in their personality formation. But I kind of moved on and started to do other things, right? And there's nothing wrong with catching the game. There's nothing wrong with watching football. There's nothing wrong with watching hockey, watching UFC. There's nothing wrong with any of that. But it's when it becomes unhealthfully like your life. And that's, you are that guy who is like, you are just the Toronto Maple Leafs fan, but you haven't hit the ice in 15 years. And you're overweight, and you're about as far from what an athlete could ever be as is imaginable. That's when sports starts to become a kind of a drag on your development. But it rubs me the wrong way when guys use the sports ball meme. I fucking hate it. I'll be honest.
Yeah. I loved football. Let me tell you. People say it's a surrogate for your identity, but you know what? These are guys that don't understand how regionalism is part of an identity. It really is. It's and it's just like one of the representatives of your identity. There's a reason that the soccer goons over in Europe like get into fistfights with each other. That's a representative. That's like going and showing up for your hometown and like beefing with the guys in the next town over. You know what I mean? It's like I've been to. Here's a quick story before we get into. We got one segment we got to hit about the spicy takes on who wins in what era and stuff like that. But I got one quick story that represents how sports ball is. So I grew up a Philadelphia Eagles fan. Philadelphia is known as like the worst place for sports fans. Like these are guys. This is the most toxic, unwelcoming, rotten, rowdy, drunken, violent bunch of pieces of shit you'll ever see in your life. We're talking if you show up to an Eagles game back in the day wearing a Cowboys jersey, they were going to dump beer on you. They're going to call you a fat. They're going to throw shit at you. It's a beef. You know what I mean? It's fucking bad. It's not good. Don't be wearing a Giants jersey or a Yankees hat or something on the speed line. At the very least, somebody's going to call you names, right? And I go to a metal show. I went to tons of metal shows in Philly. Philly used to be the coolest spot to go see like all the based metal shows. There's so many cool like mid-sized venues and where you see all the underground bands, and it was rowdy, right? And I go to a concert. It was headline. It was Cannibal Corpse, Dying Fetus, Devourment, and I can't remember. It was a big death metal show, right? And we go there. The show was just wild, right? It was so nuts. And as we're leaving, everybody's going out. The mosh pits were crazy. It was so fun. Guys are a little bit bloody or whatever. But you go to a metal show, it's not as violent as you think. You fall, people pick you up. If you get smacked in the face on accident, a guy will apologize. Someone runs into your beer, they'll buy you a new one. It's rowdy and violent and chaotic, but it's also a brotherhood. You know what I mean? There's a respect there. Absolutely. As we're walking out, some joker, this is in Philly, some joker goes, "Let's go Steelers!" And like he probably was, I think he was just trolling. I don't even think he was a Steelers fan, right? I think he was just being funny. And some guy walks up, he's like, "Fuck you, f***ing Eagles roll!" And he shoves him. They start punching. People, the whole place erupts into this big, giant Wild West fist fight. And I'm not going to lie, someone got shoved into me. I punched him in the back of the head. His boy punched me in the head. I just start punching. I'm getting punched. I just like, when something like that breaks out, you just like lose control. You're not even like yourself anymore. You just go into ape mode, right? You just start punching. Everybody's punching. The security guards get in. They're punching. They're fighting. The whole fucking place goes nuts. The cops show up. People run. It was like the worst fight I've ever seen at a metal show. And it wasn't even about metal. It was about sports. It was about a sports rivalry. Yeah. So that just represents to me like what sports was about. It isn't about consumerism. It is now. It is about consumerism now, and like all the stuff, all the criticisms. Yes, those are true. But at its purest form, the sports ball is about a representation of your regional identity. It's part of, like, at least in the American sense. So I guess guys can disagree with that or whatever, but I grew up loving it, and I don't watch football anymore because it's for trans and gays and pause and like all that shit now. But
yeah.
But it hurts me that it went that way because I used to really love it. So Mike, I know we're running out of time, but we got one more thing. We got to hit this. We got to talk about who would have made it back in the day and whether or not the guys from back in the day would make it now. Because when I posted that on Telegram, who's going to make it when and who would be competitive, it was crazy arguments. Guys like, there's no way anybody back then could compete with the level of athleticism now. They don't have the skill, technique. And then there were guys that were the other way, like, no, the guys now are too big of pussies to make it back in the day, right? So what is your take on, could the old school guys, at least the greats, or in general, could they compete now? And could the guys now compete back then?
Well, I'll put it this way. And first of all, I mean, to qualify, I could have given you a much more informed opinion probably 20 years ago when I was like closer to the point of like being involved in martial arts and really knowing something about the technical aspect of it and whatnot. But I'll say this, having like viewed some of these old school, like I've seen enough of the newer UFC like over the years to kind of get a feel for it. And having gone back and actually looked at any of the, like some of these early ones, I will say that the vast majority of guys in the UFC today would absolutely fucking demolish the vast majority of guys in the UFC back then. But I would say that the champions of yesteryear would probably beat the champions of today. Because the thing about the UFC back then is that there was just so much variety, so much of a spread in terms of talent and athletic ability and all of that. And I think I see something in the old UFCs that I just don't see today. And that's fucking rage. It's the wolf's rage. I don't know why, but like back then, the UFC, like it's not to say that the guys today are like these manicured pussies by any stretch of the imagination. But guys back then, especially like the ones that were like really fucking dangerous, were not nice people. Like some of these guys were like, you would not want to run up against that guy in a blind alley, because like, and just beyond his fighting ability, like the guy that, like, we keep going back to this, but that first fight between like the kickboxer guy and the sumo wrestler, that kickboxer guy does not seem like there's something fucking wrong with him. I don't know what it is, but it's just like you could just fucking tell on a gut level that guy is dangerous. You know what I mean? Just as a person, not just as a fighter or whatever. But the other thing is, like, you were talking about guys like Dan Severn and whatnot. I think Dan Severn would still, like, if you took a 30-year-old Dan Severn and you put him against, the reigning UFC champion of today, I say he beats him hands down. I would give you good odds on that, because that guy was just such a he was the beast, right? He was absolutely dominant. You look at a Ken Shamrock, who's kind of like much more like the newer style UFC fighter. This guy is he's cut and built in the way that like could absolutely compete with any of these guys today from a pure athleticism point of view. But he's also trained in his own martial art. And I think that these guys, I think that the champions of the first, like, say, 5 UFCs would probably beat the champions of today. But if you put the average guy of one era against the average guy of the other, I would hand it to the modern UFC. I think that there's just the caliber of talent on average is just much, much higher today. And the level of training is just much higher. Like, these guys clearly train like crazy. And, it's been refined over time. The mixture of martial arts is, it's a very specific mix of, wrestling and striking and submission, grappling and all that has really been refined over time, and it's actually probably improved from a technical standpoint. But I don't know. I just say if you put Dan Severn in there with like Conor McGregor gets his ass fucking handed to him.
Yeah, going for this question, I actually called up a couple of my boys and hit up a few of my boys that are martial artists and train and are teachers and all this. I hit up my boys that are experts and I asked them. And what was funny? It was like the same split. It was like the older guys were like, no way, the old school UFC dudes were way tougher. And then the younger dudes that I talked to, they're like, no, the training, they don't have the skill. But so it was like this generational loyalty to each. But when I broke them down, I talked to it. This is kind of my take, informed by talking to them. And this is just like what I think is you kind of got to go case by case basis. Here's the thing, because of the nature of the old school tournaments, most of the guys in today's UFC that are like under middleweight weight class wouldn't make it because they're just too small. Conor McGregor, how much does he weigh? 140 pounds. He's not beating anybody. It doesn't matter like what he thinks whatever. You put him in a ring with a 260-pound Olympic or Division I wrestling champ that has gnarly hands, he's just going to get slaughtered. You know what I mean? He just doesn't – he's not big enough. Another thing is, like you mentioned, a lot of these guys that fought in the first UFC era, the golden era, 1 to 10, these were guys that were from the no-holds-barred circuit. These guys were killers. There was something wrong with them. They weren't. They were in there to hurt people. When they got in that ring in the UFC, 1 through 10, they thought like this is my only chance to show that I'm a fighter. They weren't training for months and months and specializing in countering one guy or whatever. They were just killers that were there ready to spill blood. And the new guys. And I'm not saying there's guys in there that aren't killers, that don't have the killer instinct and stuff like that. But these guys are more careful. They want to preserve their careers. They're more professional. They want to make more money over a longer period of time, which is obviously smarter. Like, I would rather do that. But just those two mentalities are just like, what are you going to do? You're trying to preserve your body and you're trying to do this. And then you go into a ring with a guy that just doesn't care if he dies. And he's going to, he's going to like punch you in the nuts and then throw elbows to the back of your spine. And like, that's just, you know what I mean? Like it's, but if you take one by one basis, there's a few guys, obviously in the old school, Dan Severn, like I said before, any period of time, he's going to dominate. Don Fry, this is a guy that grew up on a farm. He's I believe he's from Arizona. He was a firefighter. He was a Division I wrestling champ, kickboxer, all this kind of stuff. And on top of everything, he was just fucking nails. Don Fry was just nails. Go watch his. He had a fight in Japan against Yoshihiro Takayama, and this Yoshihiro Takayama is like 60 pounds heavier, 5 inches taller. The guy's an absolute giant, and it's one of the most brutal, ridiculous fights in all time. They literally just blow for blow blasting each other in the face, hoping one guy goes down. At the end of the fight, Don Fry won, but it was a gnarly fight. This guy was just tough. Don Fry could dominate in any era. Mark Coleman is 6'1", 250 pounds, Olympic wrestler, extremely powerful. They called him the Hammer. They call him the godfather of ground and pound. He coined the term. He invented the style. This guy his technique is tried and true in any era. He is a big, strong, fast guy with superior world-renowned wrestling skill and hammer hands. You put him in the ring with anybody, he takes him down, he blasts you in the face. It doesn't matter your training or your skill or whatever. If a big, strong guy takes you down and blasts you in the face, you're in trouble. There are a few guys in the more modern era. You know, obviously your Chuck Liddells. I think your Forrest Griffin. A lot of the bigger, stronger guys that are in the sport today. Yeah, they could definitely hack it back then. But overall, as far as like if you just like 1v1, the average UFC fighter in UFC 3 versus your average UFC guy today, it's not even a contest because the guys in the early ones are just kind of sort of regular. The talent pool was much smaller back then. Now they're plucking the best of the best out of the entire world. You know what I mean? At will.
Yeah, it's a good point to like make about like that guys today are worried about, you know, preserving their careers and like going the distance, whereas back in the day it was like this is your one shot to do it. And the other thing you gotta ask if you're asking this question is, what are the rules? Is it no holds barred again, or is it like, you know, modern rules? Is it one night event like it used to be, or is it like a kind of a series like it is now? I think that the guys back then were better suited to those rules back then, and the guys now are obviously better suited to the rules today. But if it was another no holds barred kind of thing, you know, I'm going to give the edge to the greats from the first like 5 UFCs, just because, you know, some of these, I mean, like I don't read like, you know, Don Fry and Ken Shamrock as like psychopaths or whatever.
Yeah, no.
But there's like definitely some killer instinct back then that's kind of like it's above and beyond what we see today kind of thing. And I think that if you're going to say like, all right, you can basically like, you know, beat the guy within an inch of his life, and then you've got to do like 3 fights that night minimum or whatever, then I think it's going to be tough. It's going to be tough for the modern guys to be able to do that with all their athleticism, with all their training, with all their endurance and everything like that. It's just hard to get your head fucking pounded in 3 times in one night, unless you're like the guy who has done that his whole life and has basically like come up through the you know, the unofficial Fight Club scene or whatever, you know, no holds barred, like guys actually getting killed circuit sort of thing. So they're 2 different eras. They're two different styles of fighter. One's a little bit more primordial than the other. One's a bit more technical than the other. I don't know. It's hard to say. It'd be interesting. It'd be cool if you could do this you know, time travel cage match.
Yeah. Yeah, I do think that there are a few guys back in the day that were really, really dominant that would have a little bit more. Like I think that Tank Abbott would have more trouble today.
Yeah,
because
he's just not athletic enough.
He's now obviously if you put him in a cage in a fight against anybody, he's a dangerous man. You know what I mean? He is a big, strong. Like Tank Abbott was considered like the hardest puncher in the world. You know, this guy, if it doesn't go your way, if this guy hits you in the face, it sucks. You know what I mean? This is a guy that punched people out and tried to throw their limp bodies out of the fucking cage. The guy was a maniac. But so he would be dangerous. Like you put him in the cage with Chuck Liddell in his prime, or you know, I don't know who's the big guy now in the heavyweights in UFC. But if you put him in the cage, Tank Abbott, I mean, he's a big, strong, a lot of gas in the tank, tough. You have those attributes, you're dangerous anywhere. But would he have the same amount of wins that he did? No, he would get choked out a lot. He would get taken. He didn't have the ground skill that the guys do now. But I think he would still definitely be dangerous.
Oh yeah, definitely. And that's the other thing is that now it is much more technical. It has advanced in this respect. I would be very interested to see how Royce Gracie would do. I would think that he wouldn't do as well, to be honest. He didn't have the striking power that, you know, say a Ken Shamrock did, because Ken Shamrock being, you know, a very well-rounded fighter type thing. But who knows? I mean, you know, back in the day in 1993 or something like that, when the Gracies were, when that was a going concern, and they were basically the flagship family for Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. Surely back then there were guys who were good strikers and good wrestlers. It would be interesting. I don't know. I think that the technique is advanced to the degree that Royce Gracie wouldn't be as dominant as he was back then, because he was dominant strictly on the basis of technique. And I think technique has actually improved since then. So I think he's one of the guys that probably wouldn't do as well as some of the others.
Yeah. Royce Gracie was kicking ass because he was using a technique that nobody else knew. Nowadays, not only do they're like 20 years ahead, they're like better. They have better jiu-jitsu than Royce Gracie did. You know what I mean? So it's like Royce Gracie, unfortunately, would get romped. Like he would have trouble.
Absolutely. But then again, I mean, part of it is because everyone is kind of Royce Gracie now in their technique. He's been like absolutely gigantic in his influence and his whole family's influence. So, it's an interesting hypothetical to throw out there. Ultimately, we'll never know. But for my money, I would never go out and actually like watch a UFC today unless it was like for something like, a social thing, like going out with the boys and getting some beers or whatever. But, I could get down with like watching UFC 3 today. You know? I could watch that because that's still interesting to me. I still like seeing the different martial arts go head to head. But so as for pure entertainment value, the old shit stacks up in a way that the new shit doesn't. And to be honest, it's more exhilarating to watch this, like, no holds barred, like guys really just getting absolutely rocked. Kind of thing. It doesn't happen as often nowadays as it once did. So no, more exciting as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, it's far more controlled now. It's far more safe. You see guys that when they step into the ring, like their body of work. You watch all of these videos leading up to the fight about analyzing their techniques and how they're going to match. So you sort of have it. Obviously, there's some upsets. An upset back then was like. Nowadays, when you see an upset, it's, oh my God, that was an upset. Back then, every match was an upset. You know what I mean?
You never knew which way it would go. So
there was this like air of randomness. Like you have no idea what's going to happen. It could go either way. The no weight class. It was more raw. It was more rugged. It was more ruthless. And I don't know. Me personally, I'm with you. I kind of fell off UFC. I kind of stopped watching when Chuck Liddell went out and, some of those guys stopped fighting. I don't like the air. I think Conor McGregor is a faggot. I think that he's like, he's like wearing the jewelry.
Way too cocky.
Yeah, he's just a fucking faggot. Throw him in a wood chipper. Honestly, when he was doing that Mayweather thing, I was hoping Mayweather was going to like fucking put him in the hospital. Cause that's how bad, that's how bad I hate Conor McGregor. I think he's such a douchebag. And I don't like the princess vibe that they have. I make all this money. These are like multi millionaires, and it's just back then they were fighting for 30 grand. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Now it's like I don't know. I don't like the vibe. I don't like the air. It's just I don't know. It's not my thing. I like the old school stuff. Not saying the new school fighters are bad. A lot of them are tremendous and absolute legends and champions in their own right. Not taking anything away from it. It's just me being a grognard 30-year-old boomer that thinks everything new sucks. I'm the old man that yells at clouds. That's just the way that it is. Fuck clouds. They're a bunch of f***s. So maybe they wouldn't be.
I'm down with that. Yeah.
So that's my take on it.
Nice. All right. So I think that's about all I had to say on the old school UFC thing. Do you want to close it out?
Yeah, let's close it out. So, everybody, thank you so much for tuning in. We appreciate each and every one of you guys that support Culture Dads and support Imperium Press and all the great stuff they're building over there. If you're listening now, that means you're already signed up. But Anyways, if you want to hear more, make sure you're over at imperiumpress.org/podcast and go get all of the stuff. Mr. Mike and Joel have the Imperium Cast, which is really, really great stuff, covering base politics and all that good stuff. But then there's other tiers that have awesome stuff like hardback books, all kind of good stuff. Mike is really stacking up the rewards over there to help Imperium Press grow and really solidify itself, galvanize itself as a lasting institution that has foreverness for us. And if you want to see what I'm doing, go over to thebizarchives.com. Follow me on Twitter and Telegram at thebizarchives. Go check out some based pulp fiction and stuff like that. I don't know what we're gonna do next time. We got some stuff in the old archive we want to bring out and talk about. But I'll see you guys next time on the next episode of Culture Dads. Thank you so much, everybody, for your continued support, and I'll see you next time.
You're listening to an episode of the latest Culture Dads, Age of Sword and Cassette, where two fathers and community leaders discuss modern culture from a timeless perspective. Head on over to culturedads.com for podcasts every week.